To see how it got there, go back to December 1980. Twin U.S. Air Force bases, RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge, sat on British soil with tactical nuclear weapons nearby. Names you'll hear again: Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, John Burroughs, Jim Penniston. Their stories don't agree, but the paper trail began with footprints. First night, the footprints in the clearing. The first call wasn't cosmic. Around 3 a.m., December 26, 1980, a security patrol near the east gate of RAF Woodbridge saw lights drop beyond the treeline of Rendlesham Forest. The Cold War was humming. Nukes were behind the fence. Stepping off base at night with weapons was a career risk. They went anyway. Airman First Class John Burroughs moved under the pines with Staff Sergeant Jim Penniston and Airman Ed Cabansag, each breath showing white. The ground muffled their crunching boots. Ahead, through thin trunks, something pulsed, red, blue, white, like it was breathing. Stakes, in that moment, were simple and heavy. If it was a downed aircraft, lives were on the line. If it was an intruder, the base was compromised. If it was nothing, every minute they spent out here would be used against them. Their radios popped. "Proceeding into the forest," one said, voice low. The response came back faint, like the trees were swallowing it. They kept moving. The light drifted, then tucked itself behind branches as if it knew how to use cover. Burroughs later said his legs felt leaden, like he'd stepped through heat. Penniston would say he closed to within touching distance. Cabansag's statement struck a different tone. What they'd chased looked like a beacon farther off than they thought. They broke into a small clearing. The light vanished. What remained were details that felt wrong in the cold. 3 shallow impressions in the frozen topsoil, forming a triangle, each spaced evenly, like a tripod had been pressed into the ground. Branch tips were snapped clean, not torn. Sticky sap beaded on bark where something had scraped. The men crouched and compared boot prints to the depressions, too even, too aligned. Marking the site, Penniston said, already sketching. He traced the 3 indentations, measured distances. The notebook would become its own riddle years later. Burroughs held his light, hand trembling hard enough the beam jittered. He'd remember the sound next, the shrill, tearing scream from somewhere across the fields, animals panicking like a switch had been thrown. 2 nights later, Halt would record similar animal distress on tape. They called Suffolk police around 4 a.m. Officers walked the treeline, saw nothing but the beam of the Orfordness lighthouse arcing every 5 seconds on the horizon. "It's the lighthouse," one said. The airmen kept their place in the dirt anyway. By daylight, the team returned to the clearing. Frost rimed the ground. The impressions were still there, clearer now. 3 marks, each a few inches deep, pressed into the earth. They drew a triangle roughly balanced, not random stamping. Foresters and later skeptics would call them rabbit diggings. A Polaroid taken that morning shows a patch of scrub and disturbed soil, quiet, ordinary, and contested ever since. Under orders, a radiation survey meter, and then /PDR 27 was brought out later. Not that first morning. Those instrumented readings would come on the second night with Lieutenant Colonel Halt. But even here, the airmen were already thinking in terms of instruments and protocol. You can hear that in the way Penniston cataloged abrasions, the height of the sap marks, the angles pointing inward toward the supposed center. Back at the east gate, the debate started. It was the lighthouse. No, the cadence didn't match what they'd seen moving through the trees. "You can't have close-in beams from a lighthouse," one security man said later on shift change. "And what about the broken branches?" The answer was a shrug. If this was benign, they could stand down and nobody lost face. If it wasn't, they were staring at an incident near nuclear assets in a forest owned by someone else's government. Meanwhile, Penniston's notebook filled. He sketched what he said he'd seen out in that tangle of pines. A wedge-shaped object with a smooth surface and etched symbols on a panel. Triangles and rectangles in tidy rows. None of the official statements from that morning mention him touching a craft. His claim would come later, years later, after the first wave of skepticism and the Halt memo's restrained language hit the press. That delay would fracture witness unity, but in the cold clearing, the notebook already mattered. It made the moment anchor itself in ink. Burroughs didn't argue philosophy. He was shaking. He later described a haze, a kind of static screen in the air. His memory of how long they were in the woods never stabilized. Minutes? Hours? He'd carry that blankness into a long fight with the Department of Veterans Affairs, and eventually the VA would acknowledge in-service exposure to something during those dates. That's a thread we'll pull later. For now, it sat like a quiet weight behind his eyes as he stared at those 3 impressions. The night duty supervisors heard them out and filed it under unexplained lights. No siren, no base lockdown. The lighthouse theory was floated from the start. A simple story helps people sleep. But the forest wasn't done. Here's the part that sticks. The micro moments you only get from people who were there. A glove slipped off and hit the frost like a coin. A pencil snapped. Peniston swore, then turned the stub sideways to keep writing. Cabansag cupped his hands and called out into the trees, half expecting a response. Nothing came back but the soft rush of the North Sea wind. It might have ended there. While command wrote it off, the forest didn't. 3 nights later, the deputy base commander would walk back to those same 3 impressions with a microcassette recorder in his pocket. And this time, the tape would remember what the men couldn't. The lighthouse theory versus field observations. Back at the gate, the argument came down to rhythm. The Orfordness lighthouse threw a flash every 5 seconds, bright and mechanical, punching a corridor of light across the coast. If that's what they'd chased, it meant stand down, write it up, go home. If it wasn't, command had to escalate an intrusion near 2 NATO bases storing tactical nuclear weapons. Nobody wanted to be wrong in either direction. They tested it the way security cops do, by walking, by timing, by looking from multiple angles. Cabansag's statement later reads like a map. We could see a beacon going around, he wrote, and they pushed toward it until the angle revealed a lit farmhouse near Capel Green, not a craft. The flashing beyond lined up with the sea and the lighthouse. That's one version, written within days. But the men who'd been in the trees kept talking about movement. Not flash movement, not the steady sweep of a light on a tower, but a glow that slid behind trunks, dipped low, then lifted in a way the lighthouse couldn't. You hear the split in the ranks, the ones who felt fooled and the ones who felt watched. Duty required they assume benign until proven otherwise. Pride made that easier. Line of sight checks became a ritual. Guards on later shifts stood near the east gate and counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, waiting for the pulse. It came, exactly as promised, knifing through the damp air. That's it, someone said, the relief almost a command. But when they traced the first night's path through the forest, the cadence didn't fit what they remembered. Close and beams, a white spill that seemed to reach through branches and pick a spot, as if aimed. The next morning's physical trace didn't sit cleanly in the lighthouse box either. 3 evenly spaced ground impressions, sap drops, matched height scrapes pointing toward a center. Those are up-close details, not horizon effects. Skeptics would later call the impressions rabbit diggings, and the scrapes ordinary forestry scars. Foresters who walked the site agreed the marks could be natural. The airmen didn't buy it. They'd seen neatness in the pattern that felt designed. Meanwhile, the question of escalation hung over the radios. If you declare an unknown airborne object near a base with nuclear munitions, you trigger a cascade. Lockdowns, logs, cross-notification to the Ministry of Defense. If you say lighthouse, life keeps moving. The night duty supervisors used the lighter word, unexplained lights. No alarms. No formal intruder report. The first night ended as a problem of perception, not policy, leaving stress to steep in the people who had to stand those posts again. Off shift, the debate turned human. Some of the security police ribbed Burroughs and Peniston. You chased a lighthouse, they said, half laughing, half warning them not to make a career out of it. Others pulled them aside and asked about the scream, about the weird calm that fell after, about radios that sounded like they were talking through wet cloth. Those questions lived in the gray space between ridicule and respect. Fear sits there too. Back in the forest, the physical geography stacked the odds toward confusion. Pine rows create straight corridors that trick the eyes. Distant strobes find gaps and appear closer than they are. But the men kept pointing to one thing you can't fake, proximity. When you're under trees and a light seems to reach you, not just bathe the horizon, your body knows the difference. They held on to that, to check the cadence for themselves. Some walked to the farmer's field at Capel Green and turned to face the sea. 5 seconds on the dot. When they stepped back into the woods, the flash broke, scattered by branches, felt different. That contrast became a talking point. In the open, the lighthouse ruled the night. In the trees, something else had moved. Command didn't change posture. The official story stayed neat, ready for any inspector. Patrol misread coastal lights, no threat, base secure. That was enough, until it wasn't. 3 nights later, when Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt took a small team and a radiation meter back to the impressions, he brought a microcassette recorder. He wasn't going to argue cadence, he was going to capture it. The stalemate was about to break, not in a briefing room, but in the wind and the breath of men counting seconds in the dark. Halt takes over, the tape starts rolling. Saturday night, December 27th, 1980 turns into the early hours of the 28th. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt is at an officer's dinner when a young lieutenant leans in and says, "The UFO is back." Halt excuses himself, drives to Bentwaters, changes, then heads to the forest. He isn't out there to gossip. He's the deputy base commander, and he carries a Lanier microcassette recorder for notes. Tonight, that recorder will archive breath, wind, and the limits of certainty. He starts where the first night left a scar, the little clearing with the 3 ground depressions. You can hear the wind spill over the mic, 150 feet or more from the suspected impact point. He says, steady clipped. The Lightall floodlight won't cooperate. Can't get the Lightall to work. Send back and get another. On the radio, security traffic crackles. Bustinza calling security control. Names and jargon anchor the tape in the base's living system. And in the minds of men who know that calm voices are how you keep hands from shaking. A Geiger counter comes out, and /PDR, 27, standard issue. Sergeant Monroe Neville's, chemical defense instructor, handles it, unfamiliar enough that his learning curve leaks onto the tape. Minor clicks, he tells Halt at first. They ease toward the indentations. Can you read that on the scale? Halt asks. Neville shifts ranges. We're now on the 5/10 scale. The numbers aren't dramatic, but they matter because they're numbers. Right at a half of a millirem. Neville says in one moment Halt will later point to. In plain terms, around 0.07 milliroentgens per hour at the best point, slightly above their background sweeps of 0.03 to 0.04. Halt narrates as if for a future reader. Here's the center. Here's an abrasion on a tree. I've never seen a pine tree that's been damaged react that fast, he mutters, noticing sap marks that gleam like sequins in the flashlight. The tape captures microordinary life too. A burst of piano music accidentally recorded over at home later, his daughter in another room. It's human, messy, and impossible to fake in retrospect. They circle, counting clicks, dragging the meter close to the ground, then up tree trunks. Up towards 7, just jumped up towards 7/10, Bruce England says, the lieutenant who found Halt at dinner now guiding him around the site. Halt calibrates the moment, 7/10? Right there in the center? The readings don't scream danger, and Halt notes it. We're still comfortably safe here. But the pattern is clear, center, tree abrasions facing inward, a triangle that behaves like a map. The tape isn't a straight run. Halt admits later he kept clicking it off to save the 20-minute side. That's why there are jumps. He's trying to preserve tape for when it matters. 2/3 of the way through, it pays off. England breaks the routine. He sees a flashing light through the trees, in line with a farmhouse to the east. Halt's voice tightens, then evens. There it is, there it is. They time it. Every 5 seconds, a pulse. That cadence is the Orfordness Lighthouse's signature, skeptics will say. In the moment, the men note the alignment and keep watching. Then the light seems to move, drift higher, break into multiple points. There's 3 of them now, someone says. Star-like lights, Halt will write later. 2 to the north, 1 to the south, about 10 degrees above the horizon, consistent with bright stars near the horizon such as Sirius. The brightest hovers, then beams down a stream of light from time to time, as his later memo phrases it. On tape, you hear the breath spike and the diction tighten, as if the body knows when something breaks the pattern. He toggles between description and command. Keep the floodlight off, he orders at one point when they worry about losing night vision. He keeps the chain listening. You can hear radios in the background, Security 6, East Gate, Lightall requests. Nervous humor slips out in half-lines that don't land as jokes. They're there to steady hands more than to be funny. When the pencil beam shows Halt's words, it's quick and narrow, a shaft that seems to mark the ground at an angle. The men react in real time. It's coming this way, Halt says into the recorder, a sentence that puts a weight in the throat even decades later. The meter clicks don't spike like a danger meter in a movie. They rattle at their modest pace, indifferent to drama. The contrast makes the tape feel more honest. This is the moment the tape becomes a battleground. Supporters point to voice stress, breath rate, the specific cadence of 5-second flashes, then splitting lights, then beams, an arc that doesn't sit neatly on a lighthouse alone. Skeptics answer, optical effects, stars near the horizon, Sirius to the south, atmospheric twinkle, and men primed by the first night to read meaning into flashes. Halt's own later recollections grow more dramatic than his original tape. The tape is the anchor. It keeps yanking everything back to wind, clicks, and short sentences. Meanwhile, something else is brewing off tape. In the background of the chain, near the weapons storage area, guards will later claim they saw narrow shafts of light come down, tracking positions. Radios reportedly died. Alarms reportedly didn't answer. There's no official log to hand us here. But on the tape, Halt marks beams and direction, and the timing brushes the same window those guards talk about. The parallel is unnerving, even if it's only circumstantial. Halt doesn't declare aliens. He narrates. He notes. He keeps the recorder alive until there's nothing left to capture but wind and the sound of men deciding whether to escalate. When he heads back to write the memo, that restraint will follow him. Unexplained lights, it'll say at the top. But before the paperwork, the tape closes on breath and the 5-second heartbeat of a coast light arguing with whatever else moved through those trees. The weapons storage area, reports of beams. While Halt's team was tracing clicks in the pines, something else was unfolding where the base could least afford ambiguity. The weapons storage area at Bentwaters, the fenced heart of tactical readiness. Concrete revetments, layered sensors, patrol routes drilled into muscle memory. This was where mistakes ended careers. It's also where guards later said the lights didn't just appear, they acted. Start with the stakes. Those bunkers were part of a NATO war plan, and any intruder in that airspace, human or not, forced a chain of responses nobody wanted to trigger without certainty. You don't call possible compromise on a hunch. You also don't ignore a narrow shaft of light that seems to pick out a fence line like a finger. The accounts don't come from an official incident log. There isn't one we can point to. What we have are converging recollections from guards who worked nights, some speaking decades later but aligning on key beats. A thin beam, pencil narrow, probing along the perimeter, radios that went to static, a quiet that felt engineered. According to these men, a red-blue source above the treeline cast a concentrated bar that moved, not like a flood, but like a searchlight scaled down and precise. One young sergeant, knew enough to still worry about how he sounded on the net, reportedly hit his push to talk and got nothing but hiss. He moved 2 steps, the beam followed, then stopped on the fence stanchion at his 2 o'clock as if tagging a coordinate. Training says escalate to alarms. He reached for the panel. Dead glass. Another guard at a different position tried his handset and felt the strange lag of a carrier that refuses to catch. 2 isolated malfunctions? Maybe. Simultaneous? You can hear why the rumor mill called it switched off. Here's where the timeline brushes Halt's tape. On that recording, his voice tightens a hair when he says, "It's coming this way," then notes a pencil beam from the bright object. He's miles from the bunkers and not looking at a panel, but the description matches the guard's language with uncomfortable precision. Same night window. Same odd behavior, light that seems to know where men are. What we don't have, a formal blotter entry saying beam impacted WSA, or a maintenance ticket for a dead zone outage. Security culture explains part of that. If nothing ultimately breached, if the alarms came back when the moment passed, if supervisors judged it a transitory anomaly, the safest paper trail is the one that never leaves a drawer. Maud's stance on Rendlesham, no defense significance, didn't exactly invite detail. Still, the human pieces lock in. One guard remembers counting under his breath, 1, 2, 3, timing a flash cadence he'd later hear argued about as Lighthouse spill. He didn't care what the horizon did. He cared that a sliver of light crossed his boot and settled on the padlock seam of a gate he'd checked an hour earlier. Another talks about the way the compound sounded wrong, the hum of electrics seeming to recede like someone turned down a fader. There's a version of events where all of this lives in the realm of perception under stress. Cold nights, adrenaline, expectation primed by chatter from the woods. Add the rhythmic dominance of any bright light at sea and radios that can and do fail, and you can write it off. The trouble is, when separate people in separated towers talk about the same narrow illumination tracking positions, the pattern gets harder to flatten. If a craft, or whatever you want to call a bright object that throws a controllable beam, demonstrates that it can interact with a weapons area at will, it isn't just theatrics. It's a message to the only audience that matters, the command post. It says we can reach in without touching, and your procedures can't stop the reach. No shots fired, no footprints to measure, just a memory of being seen in a place designed to see first. Years later, some of those guards would tell their pieces to researchers who specialized in nuclear-adjacent incursions. Malmstrom, 1967, Loring, 1975, Minot, 1975. The same motif kept surfacing: proximity to strategic assets, lights that perform, systems that hiccup at exactly the moment you most want them to behave. Skeptics point out that rumors travel faster than logs and that memories spool out under the weight of stories told often. Fair cautions, but even caution has to account for why these recollections rhyme.